Imagine boarding a plane to chase your dreams, carrying not just your hopes, but groundbreaking inventions that could save lives. Now imagine being met not with respect, but with cold hostility and outright discrimination, simply because of your skin color. This is the reality that 17-year-old Janelle Carter faced on what was supposed to be a routine flight. Daughter of a billionaire CEO, brilliant aerospace engineering student, and passionate innovator. Janelle's journey from silenced passenger to fearless advocate sparks a wildfire that shakes the entire airline industry. What happens when courage meets prejudice at 30,000 feet? How does a young woman balance grace and grit while confronting systemic bias? Can one voice truly change an entire industry? And what does it take to transform personal pain into a movement that redefines dignity for all travelers? This isn't just a story about a slap. It's a story about resilience, justice, and the power of vision over vengeance. If you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of background, hit that like button, share this story to raise awareness, and subscribe to our channel to join the movement. Now, buckle up. Here's the incredible journey of Janelle Carter. Janelle Carter stood in the center of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, her hands resting lightly on the leather strap of a worn backpack. The crowd flowed around her like water business people rushing to make connections, families herding children, flight announcements echoing off high-glass ceilings. Her sweatshirt read, "Knit Summer Innovators, 2025." But no one looked twice. To most people, she was just another teenager traveling alone. And that was exactly what she wanted. This flight wasn't supposed to be a statement. It was research. Weeks ago, her father, Dominic Carter, had offered the private jet without hesitation. "Janelle, it's safer, more secure. Why risk anything before your program even starts?" he'd said, pacing his office in Austin. But Janelle had been firm. "I need to experience what other passengers experience. Dad, the real problems are in the places no one's paying attention to." Dominic hadn't liked it, but he understood. He always did. At 16, Janelle Carter was already a published aviation engineering scholar, with 3 pending patents and a full-ride invitation to the Northbridge Institute of Technology's Elite Summer Initiative. But brilliance wasn't her defining trait. It was her stillness, her ability to observe chaos without flinching, a skill she'd learned not in classrooms, but through quiet endurance. She reached Gate B-17 and joined the line of economy passengers, tucking a small notebook into her backpack. On the back cover, faded gold lettering read, "From Mom." For every invention yet to be, it had belonged to her mother, a systems designer who'd passed away from cancer when Janelle was 9. Since then, her father had taken the world by storm, building Carter Aero Systems into a $30 billion giant. But Janelle remained grounded. She still drank instant cocoa. She still wrote by hand. She still walked when she could ride. Her phone buzzed. Raya Cole. "Just boarded first class. You sure about this?" Janelle smiled slightly. "Janelle, don't worry. This is exactly where I need to be." She joined the boarding line. No fanfare, no security detail. Just a teenage girl with big ideas and quiet confidence. The flight attendant greeting passengers at the aircraft door was tall, sharp-shouldered, and severe. Her name tag read Colleen Baxter. She smiled at the man ahead of Janelle, cracking a joke about carry-ons, her tone light and warm. But as Janelle stepped forward, the warmth vanished like someone had flipped a switch. "Boarding pass," Colleen said curtly. Janelle handed it over, her fingers steady. Colleen looked her over dark skin, natural curls pulled into a low puff, plain jeans, MIT sweatshirt, and then down at the pass. 27B. Colleen read, lips tight, "Middle seat. Move along." Janelle blinked once. No greeting, no smile. Just an order. She nodded silently and moved down the aisle. The plane smelled like lavender cleaner and recycled air. Passengers wrestled with overhead bins, whispering apologies and complaints. Janelle reached row 27 and slid into the center seat. The window was taken by a teenage boy with gelled blonde hair and AirPods already wedged into his ears. He barely glanced at her before turning to the window. To her left, by the aisle, sat a woman in her 50s, Latina, with kind eyes and a soft lavender scarf. She smiled warmly. "First flight?" the woman asked. Janelle shook her head. "First commercial flight in a while." The woman chuckled. "You'll be fine. These things are like riding a bus, just louder and with worse snacks." "I'm Janelle," she offered. "Marisol," the woman replied. "Marisol Vega. Let me know if you need help with anything." "You're about my daughter's age." Janelle nodded, already pulling out her notebook and sketching a quick layout of the boarding process. She was observing spacing, luggage flow, facial expressions. She didn't expect to feel comfortable, but she wasn't here to feel comfortable. The flight filled quickly. Noise rose. People shuffled past. She felt someone bump her shoulder hard, then move on without apology. Across the aisle, a man in a navy blazer and glasses glanced over at her. Late 30s, clean cut. He offered a polite nod. She nodded back. As the aircraft began to taxi, the captain welcomed them aboard SkyNova Flight 8111 bound for Seattle. Estimated time 5 hours, 40 minutes. Janelle didn't hear most of it. She was watching Colleen, who had now resumed her aisle patrol with quick, practiced movements. She greeted others with a smile. But as she passed Janelle's row, her eyes slid right over her. "That's fine," Janelle thought. "Let her ignore me. I'm here to observe, not to be seen." But a small part of her chest ached. Even so, it always did. She remembered walking through an upscale mall last winter. She had worn her school blazer, khakis, nothing flashy, yet the store clerk had followed her, had watched her, had asked, "Can I help you with something a dozen times more than anyone else?" It didn't matter how smart she was, how clean, how kind. Some people only saw what they wanted to see. She didn't flinch when Colleen passed again. Instead, she wrote in her notebook, "Attendant eye contact ratio 30, row 27. The seatbelt light dinged. The plane angled into the sky. As the city shrank below them, Janelle felt the familiar pull of gravity fade and the quiet thrill that always came when she was airborne. She closed her eyes and pictured the diagrams she had memorized the night before. Her mind wandered through airflow systems, oxygen deployment delay rates, and turbulence resistance upgrades. She didn't notice when Marisol dozed off, or when Brady the boy at the window shifted and sighed dramatically. But she noticed Colleen returning up the aisle with the drink cart, and this time, she was watching closely, very closely, because the numbers she had written so far told a story, and Janelle Carter had always known how to finish one. The flight had reached cruising altitude when the seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft chime. Passengers stretched. Some clicked open trays. Others retrieved books or headphones. Janelle Carter, in seat 27B, glanced sideways at Marisol Vega, who remained asleep with her scarf draped like a blanket across her shoulders. Brady Miles at the window had pulled his hoodie over his head and was now deep into a game on his phone. Sound muted, but fingers twitching with rapid taps. Janelle reached into her backpack for a small device tucked carefully in its own compartment. It was a compact airflow analyzer she had designed herself to track cabin air quality in various zones. She adjusted the screen brightness low and began logging her readings in the margin of her notebook. Nothing flashy, nothing to draw attention, just data. The flight attendant, Colleen Baxter, began the first drink service from the front. She worked quickly, smiling easily as she took orders. A man in row 22 received ginger ale and a packet of almonds. 2 rows later, she handed a woman sparkling water with lemon and cracked a joke about needing vacation more than the passengers did. Laughter followed her down the aisle like a tailwind. When she reached row 27, her rhythm changed. She smiled at Marisol, who had just awakened and was sitting upright. "Good afternoon." "What can I get you?" Colleen asked with a bright tone. "Just water." "Thank you," Marisol replied. "Of course." Colleen poured it, added ice, and handed it over with a pleasant nod. Then she turned to Brady. "Hey there. What would you like?" He didn't even look up. "Coke." Colleen reached for the can, poured it into a cup with the ice crackling, and passed it to him. Then her eyes landed on Janelle. Her expression hardened. "We're running low on drinks," she said flatly. "Water only." Janelle blinked. She glanced down at the cart, which still had multiple unopened cans visible. "Water is fine." "Thank you." Colleen didn't respond. She poured a splash of lukewarm water into a cup, passed it over without eye contact, and turned to move on. Janelle held the paper cup steady in her hand, feeling the thin plastic rim press into her palm. She said nothing. She just watched. Across the aisle, Nathan Bell was also watching. He leaned slightly toward her, lowering his voice. That wasn't right. Janelle met his eyes. "It happens," she said softly. He tilted his head, as if trying to decide if he should say more, then leaned back in his seat. His brows, however, remained furrowed. Brady let out a snort, loud enough to be heard over the hum of the engines. Probably thinks she's too good for water. Janelle didn't respond. She reached back into her bag and jotted a note. Service discrepancy. Row 27. Observe follow-ups. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to make a scene. The data would speak for itself. The thing was, she'd seen this pattern before. Not always this blatant, but always there. A slightly harsher tone, a longer delay, an unnecessary challenge to one's presence in a space. It was a slow erosion, not a storm. A few years back, during a school debate trip, a hotel concierge had accused her of sneaking into the breakfast buffet. She was wearing her school jacket, holding a room key, surrounded by classmates. "Still," the man had said, "are you sure you're staying here?" It hadn't mattered what she said. That memory flashed across her mind now, unbidden, like a wave that rolled up without warning. Janelle closed her notebook and rested it on her lap. She could feel her stomach twist, not from hunger, but from something more ancient, a tightness that lived just beneath her skin. The voice that whispered, "Stay small, stay quiet, stay out of the way." But her mother had taught her otherwise. Her mother, Yvonne, had been quiet too, but never silent. After that hotel incident, her mother had taken her aside and said, "You don't need to shout to stand tall. Let your dignity be louder than their ignorance." Janelle had held on to that. Today, more than ever. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Folks were expecting some light turbulence over Missouri. Nothing major, but flight attendants will pause service for safety. Please keep your seat belts fastened while seated. The drink carts were quickly locked and stowed. Colleen disappeared into the front galley. The hum of the cabin dimmed slightly as some passengers began watching movies, others drifting into naps. Janelle opened her notebook again, sketching a schematic of cabin airflow path. She shaded in the low-pressure zones near the tail. Her pen moved in steady lines, her breath even. Creating brought her peace. Then, suddenly, the plane jolted, a brief lurch to the right, then a drop. Gas echoed across the cabin. Janelle's cup wobbled. Brady jerked in surprise, his elbow knocking her arm. The cup tipped, water spilling onto his jeans. What the hell, he snapped, pulling off his hoodie. "I'm sorry," Janelle said immediately. "That was turbulence. Your elbow hit my—" "You did that on purpose," he hissed. "You think that's funny?" Janelle's mouth parted in confusion. "No, I don't. It was just—" "You know my name?" he interrupted, his voice raised. "Are you stalking me or something?" She looked up at the luggage bin. His bag sat there, tag swinging slightly. "Your name is on your luggage," she said quietly. Brady scoffed. "Sure it is." He reached up, waved toward the front. "Hey." Attendant Colleen reappeared a few seconds later, her jaw tight. "What's going on?" "This girl dumped water all over me," Brady said, pointing dramatically. "And now she's being weird. She knows my name." Colleen turned to Janelle, who still held the half-empty cup. "What happened?" she asked, though her tone implied she already had an answer. Janelle sat up straighter. "There was turbulence." He elbowed my arm. "The water spilled." Brady crossed his arms, shaking his head. "Nope. She aimed it. She did it on purpose." Colleen sighed. "Sir, I'm very sorry," she said, turning to Brady. "Let me get you something to clean that up." She left without acknowledging Janelle's words. Across the aisle. Nathan stood up slightly in his seat. "I saw it," he said. "It was turbulence. Nothing intentional." Colleen paused mid-step. Her eyes narrowed at him, but she kept walking. Janelle turned toward Nathan. "Thank you," she said softly. He shrugged. "I can't stand injustice, big or small." She nodded. "I appreciate that." Then she turned to face forward again, eyes glassy, throat tight. She reached into her bag, pulling out her mother's notebook again, and began scribbling without looking at the page. Behind her glasses, her eyes burned. She would not cry. Not for this. This was data. That's all. Data to improve safety. Data to reshape an industry. But somewhere inside her, a small voice rose. Why is it always me? She didn't answer it. She couldn't. Instead, she wrote down a single sentence. Some storms don't shake the plane. They live inside it. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane moved deeper into the flight path. A soft orange hue replaced the harsh fluorescence, casting a calm across the rows of passengers. But in seat 27B, Janelle Carter was far from calm. She hadn't moved in minutes. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her posture composed, but her mind was a whirl of calculations, not technical ones, emotional, social, strategic. She had just been publicly accused of deliberately spilling a drink. The attendant hadn't even looked at her when offering an apology to the boy. Nathan had defended her. Yes. But the imbalance had already been registered, not just in her mind, but in the minds of everyone around her. It wasn't about the water. It never really was. Marisol turned to her with concern. "Are you okay?" Sweetheart Janelle nodded, the same way she had nodded 1,000 times before. A practiced, quiet affirmation that let people feel like things were fine, even when they weren't. Brady Miles, still stewing in the window seat, glanced down at his damp jeans and then leaned slightly toward Colleen Baxter, who had returned with a towel and a small can of club soda. "These are brand new," he muttered dramatically, pointing to his pants. "Cost me $300. She ruined them." Colleen clicked her tongue sympathetically. "We'll do our best to help with the stain. You shouldn't have to deal with this kind of behavior." Janelle heard every word, not because they were loud, but because they were calculated, deliberately audible. They weren't just cleaning up a mess. They were performing a narrative. Colleen returned to the galley after assisting Brady, not so much as glancing at Janelle again. Nathan Bell shifted in his seat across the aisle and looked directly at her. "You okay?" "Yes." Janelle's voice was calm, but clipped. "You handled that better than most adults would have." She offered a small smile, but didn't answer. Her throat felt tight. Her mother's words echoed in her mind again. Never let pain make you small. She opened her notebook and tried to return to her sketches. Oxygen mask failure rates, inflation delay intervals, diagrams of deployment systems. These things usually centered her, but her pen felt heavier than usual, the lines uneven. Ahead of her, a voice called for a flight attendant. Moments later, Colleen reappeared. She stopped at the row directly behind Janelle and began adjusting seatbelts, checking trays. Her tone was warm and helpful. When she reached their row, however, she breezed right past without a glance. Marisol raised her hand. "Excuse me, you didn't check our row." Colleen paused, then turned her head slightly. "Your belts are visible. I'm focusing on rows that require attention." She walked on, her heels clicking, but the row behind them was already buckled. Janelle had noticed. Everyone had. Brady chuckled softly. "Maybe we're invisible." Janelle let that pass. She was used to it. People like Brady weren't looking for confrontation. They were looking for a response, and she wasn't going to give them one. But her muscles tensed just the same. The man in front of her suddenly reclined his seat all the way back with a snap. Janelle gasped slightly as her knees were crushed under the tray. She tapped his shoulder politely. "Excuse me. Would you mind adjusting your seat just a little? I have long legs and no space to move." The man didn't turn around. She pressed the call button. Nothing happened. After 5 minutes, she pressed it again. Still nothing. Across the aisle, Nathan pressed his own button. Within 30 seconds, Colleen appeared. Yes, I believe there was a call from row 27. Colleen turned and looked toward Janelle. Her eyes were cool. "There's nothing I need to address at that seat." "Actually," Janelle began, "I just had a..." Colleen raised a hand. "I'm busy preparing meal service. Please be patient." She turned and walked off again. "Unbelievable," Marisol muttered under her breath. Janelle exhaled slowly and stood up carefully, easing past Marisol and stepping toward the galley. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't approach aggressively. She simply spoke. "Excuse me." I pressed the call button. Twice. No one came. Colleen turned from the trays she was arranging. Her eyes narrowed. "I'm busy with meal preparation. The seat in front of me is fully reclined. My legs are pinned. I just wanted to ask if that is within passenger rights." Colleen interrupted. "They can adjust their seats. I understand. But I physically cannot sit upright when it's fully reclined. If you wanted more leg room, you should have purchased premium economy or first class," Colleen said with a pointed tone. Janelle blinked. The words weren't loud, but they were sharp. The message was clear. "You don't belong here." "Thank you for your time," Janelle replied, stepping back. Colleen gave a slight, dismissive nod and returned to her trays. As Janelle returned to her seat, Nathan met her gaze again. She saw something new in his eyes now. Not just sympathy. Outrage. Marisol leaned in. This woman has a real problem with you. You know that Janelle nodded once. I'm documenting everything. Good, because this is ridiculous. Meal service began. Trays were handed out across the cabin. Colleen approached their row, placing meals in front of Marisol and Brady. When she reached Janelle, she frowned. I don't have a meal listed for you. I pre-ordered a vegetarian meal when I booked. Janelle said, calm as ever. There's no record of that. Could you check again? I've already checked. Perhaps next time you'll remember to confirm your selection properly. Janelle's stomach growled quietly. She nodded and opened her backpack, removing an energy bar. Marisol looked at her with disbelief. You're telling me she doesn't get a meal? Even though she pre-ordered, Colleen didn't answer. She moved on. Brady laughed under his breath. Guess she's not on the elite list. Janelle broke off a piece of the bar and chewed slowly, breathing through her nose. One by one, the lines were stacking up. It wasn't about a cup of water, or a meal, or a blanket, or a seat back. It was about a pattern. And patterns were something Janelle understood better than anyone. She reached for her notebook again. On the blank page, she drew a line down the middle and began a list. Passenger experience, on left. Janelle's experience, on right. The contrast spoke louder than any raised voice ever could. But this wasn't just data anymore. It was personal. It was starting to feel like every quiet insult, every assumption, every time someone looked through her instead of at her. She thought of her father. She thought of her mother. And somewhere deep inside, something began to shift. Not fear, not even anger. Something stronger. Conviction. The hum of the engines had become a constant backdrop, a low-frequency reminder of altitude and distance. As the flight crossed over the Midwest, many passengers began settling in for the long stretch ahead. Headphones on, windows closed, eyes half shut. But in seat 27B, Janelle Carter was wide awake. Her notebook lay open on her tray table, filled with diagrams, timestamps, and a growing column of notes that read more like a report than a sketchbook. Her pen moved deliberately. Colleen Baxter had served 8 passengers around her without hesitation or hostility, and Janelle had received only neglect, scrutiny, and subtle scorn. Marisol Vega had given up trying to pretend this was normal. She sat beside Janelle, arms folded tightly across her chest, her expression increasingly tense with every interaction they witnessed. Colleen had reappeared twice now in their section. Both times, she had skipped their row. Both times. Brady Miles had smirked and muttered something under his breath. Janelle hadn't responded. She wouldn't. He wanted attention. She was here for answers. Across the aisle. Nathan Bell had started typing on his tablet. Occasionally, he would glance over at Janelle with a puzzled and growing concern. What had begun as small slights were stacking into something unmistakable. Janelle didn't want this. She hadn't boarded the plane hoping to catch someone doing wrong. She'd wanted to observe processes, safety, efficiency, the flow of human movement in confined space. But now she was documenting something else. Bias in motion, and it had a face. Colleen passed again, this time with a stack of blankets. She offered one to a passenger in 22C, a middle-aged white man who was half asleep, then continued down the aisle. When she reached 27B, Janelle raised her hand politely. "Excuse me, could I have a blanket?" "Please." Colleen halted. Her face barely concealed the irritation. "These are for premium customers only." Janelle looked confused. "The man in 22C just received one. His seat is also in economy." Colleen's eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing me of lying?" Janelle replied evenly. I was just asking. Colleen leaned in slightly, her voice a sharp whisper. You people always want something extra. That's not how it works here. The words struck like ice. The silence around them thickened. Marisol's hand slowly curled into a fist on her tray table. Janelle inhaled, slowly, deeply. She turned her face forward, her voice steady. Never mind the blanket. I'm fine. Colleen gave a sarcastic smile. Thought so. She continued down the aisle. Brady let out a short laugh. Busted for blanket theft. That's a new low. Janelle ignored him. She reached for her backpack, slipped out her phone, and opened her text thread with Raya Cole. Still okay. The message had come through earlier. She hadn't answered yet. Now, with her fingers shaking slightly, she typed just one word. Maybe. Then she slipped the phone back in her bag. Behind them, another passenger pressed their call button. This time, Eli Grant, the younger flight attendant, appeared. He walked softly, professionally. His demeanor was almost invisible, the way good crew members often were when no one was looking. He reached the passenger in 28A, resolved a drink request, and turned around. As he passed 27B, his eyes met Janelle's for a moment. Just a second. But something passed between them. Recognition, quiet empathy, maybe even guilt. He kept walking, his expression unreadable. Janelle lowered her eyes again and began organizing the pages that had become wrinkled from her earlier note-taking. Her diagrams were creased, her page margins frayed, and something in her chest felt just as fragile. She thought about her mother again. Yvonne Carter had once told her, not every battle is chosen, but some must be answered. This was starting to feel like one of those moments. She wasn't here to pick a fight, but she couldn't ignore the weight of this. Not when every minute it grew heavier. Brady suddenly twisted in his seat, his elbow jutting into Janelle's ribs as he reached for his charger. Sorry, he said, voice laced with sarcasm. No problem, Janelle replied, adjusting herself calmly. She didn't flinch. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. But she was beginning to feel a growing pressure under her skin, like steam building inside a closed valve. This isn't about comfort anymore. This was about control, and how some people use small powers to remind others where they thought they belonged. She adjusted her seat, her knees still cramped from the man in front of her who refused to adjust his recline. She pressed her call button again. Nothing. Marisol looked over. I've been on 40 flights. I've never seen anything like this. Janelle smiled faintly. You just don't notice it until it happens to someone sitting next to you. The cabin lights dimmed further. Passengers settled into half sleep. Brady finally seemed to stop moving. His head tilted back, mouth slightly open. Janelle pulled out her prototype case from her backpack. It was a small, shock-resistant shell that held the miniature oxygen deployment system she had designed over the past 8 months. The design solved a major inefficiency in cabin emergency protocols. She had built it using simulation data, crash statistics, and airflow modeling. Boeing was scheduled to review it next quarter. She opened the case, just to check the internal brackets. Everything was still secure. A voice from behind interrupted her focus. What's that A-toy Brady had roused again? It's a prototype, Janelle said without looking at him. Looks like something you'd get in a cereal box. Marisol turned toward him. Leave her alone, she said. I'm just saying, Brady replied with a shrug. Pretty sure this plane doesn't need help from a high school engineer. Janelle closed the case gently. I'm here to learn. That's all. Brady leaned back, kicking his foot slightly into the aisle. "Sure you are." His voice dropped to a murmur, but Janelle heard it clearly. "Bet your dad's some big shot who thinks rules don't apply to you." She froze for a moment. Then she smiled. "You'd be surprised." Nathan across the aisle watched the exchange quietly. His jaw clenched. He looked like he wanted to say something, but before he could, the plane lurched again, another pocket of turbulence, brief but sharp. A few gasps sounded in the cabin. Colleen came walking briskly from the galley, her shoes snapping on the aisle carpet. "Seatbelts, please. We may have more ahead." She stopped at various rows, tugging belts, checking trays. But again, when she reached 27B, she didn't stop. Marisol raised her hand. "You didn't check our row." Colleen didn't even pause. "Your belts are clearly fastened." "I'm moving on." "Behind them," someone whispered loud enough for others to hear. "What is going on with her?" Another voice answered. "She's got a problem with that girl." "That's what—" Janelle pretended not to hear. She kept her hands on her lap, her back straight, but inside, her breath shortened, her chest tightened. The mask of composure was still on, but it was starting to crack. And the moment it did, everything might change. Somewhere over Kansas, the hum of the engines faded into background noise for most of the cabin. Passengers began drifting into light naps. Movie screens flickered with muted comedies. A few tray tables held half-eaten meals, already forgotten. In row 27, though, no one was sleeping. Marisol Vega sat with her arms crossed tightly, her expression unreadable but her posture rigid. Brady Miles had fallen into a shallow, open-mouthed nap, his earbuds still glowing with blue LED. And in the middle seat, Janelle Carter stared blankly ahead, her thoughts moving faster than any jet engine. She had kept count. 12 interactions, 9 microaggressions, 3 overt hostilities, 0 attempts to correct or apologize. Colleen Baxter had skipped her seat during safety checks, denied her drink choices, ignored her call buttons, made passive-aggressive comments. And now, something had shifted. The energy wasn't just cold, it was threatening. She knew the signs. The way someone's eyes shifted to avoid yours. The way people laughed a little too loud when you were nearby. The way small authority became a tool to impose dominance. And the worst part wasn't the behavior itself. It was the precision of it. How it was always just beneath the line. Just enough for plausible deniability. Just enough for someone else to say, "Maybe you're overreacting." But she wasn't. Not this time. The intercom crackled as the captain's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be entering a weather system shortly. Nothing to be alarmed about. But flight attendants will be securing the cabin again. Please return your seats to the upright position and ensure your seat belts are fastened." Colleen appeared again, walking briskly down the aisle. She moved seat to seat, pulling trays closed, checking belts, securing carts. When she arrived at 27B, she glanced at Marisol and Janelle but didn't speak. She reached out suddenly and tapped Brady's shoulder. "Wake up, sir. Your tray needs to be stowed." Brady grunted, mumbled something unintelligible, and flipped his tray closed before slumping again in his seat. Colleen continued past without a glance at Janelle's tray, which was still folded down with her notebook on top. "Excuse me," Janelle called softly. Colleen didn't turn. Marisol raised her voice. "You skipped us again." Colleen stopped. She didn't turn around. "Your tray is clearly empty. I'm focusing on seats that need attention." Janelle opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. No good would come from confrontation here. Not yet. As Colleen disappeared into the forward galley, Marisol leaned in. I don't care what she says. You need to report this when we land. I will, Janelle replied. I'm keeping notes. That's not enough. Janelle didn't answer. She didn't want to admit it, but her throat was tight again. Her hands were beginning to shake. She pressed them against her thighs to steady them. Her phone buzzed. A new message from Raya Cole. Jay, everything okay? Janelle stared at the screen, her thumb hovering. She wanted to say yes, that it was manageable, that she was holding her ground. Instead, she typed 3 words, not anymore. Help. She hit send. She didn't know what Raya could do from first class, but she needed someone to know, someone who could help her hold the line. She tucked the phone back into her bag and looked up. Colleen was back, this time with a new stack of neatly folded Sky Nova blankets. She handed one to an elderly man in 25A, then another to a woman with a baby in 26D. When she reached their row, Janelle tried again. Excuse me, could I have a blanket? Colleen didn't stop. These are reserved for premium customers. I understand, Janelle said gently, but the gentleman 2 rows up is also an economy. Colleen stopped this time. Her voice was sharper now, more clipped. Are you accusing me of favoritism? I'm just asking if Colleen stepped closer, clutching the blankets tightly. Look, I think you're trying to take advantage of things you didn't pay for. This isn't a charity flight. Marisol sat forward suddenly. Okay, that's enough. Colleen ignored her. Let me see your boarding pass again. I have a feeling you're not even in the right seat. I've been sitting here the entire flight, Janelle replied. Digital passes are easy to fake. Let me see it. Janelle's breath caught. The accusation wasn't just insulting. It was dangerous. But she didn't argue. She reached into her bag, carefully sliding out her phone again. Her screen lit up to her lock screen. Colleen's eyes fell on the expensive leather backpack beneath the seat, the same one Janelle had carried since boarding. That bag looks oversized. It's a safety issue. It fits under the seat completely, Janelle said, voice calm but firm. And I need access to my engineering materials. There's a fragile prototype inside. That's a violation, Colleen declared, already leaning down. Don't touch my bag, Janelle said quickly, her hand darting forward, but Colleen had already gripped the strap. They both pulled at the same time. The tug-of-war lasted only a second, but in that second, Brady suddenly extended his foot into the aisle, nudging Janelle off balance. She stumbled slightly, her grip loosening. The backpack flew from their hands, landing hard against the floor. The clasp snapped, paper spilled out, notebooks, pencils, a few pens, and in the middle of it all, a 3D printed prototype, barely palm-sized, rolled gently across the aisle before stopping against Nathan's shoe. Gas rippled from several rows. Janelle dropped to her knees immediately, scooping up her notes with shaking hands. Marisol bent to help. Brady laughed. Nice work. What even is all that junk? Nathan picked up the prototype and held it gently. It looked like a miniature oxygen module with tubing coils. Colleen stood frozen. You've created a disruption, she said coldly. You're in violation of multiple cabin protocols. Janelle looked up, her eyes wide but unwavering. You grabbed my property without consent. Colleen didn't answer. She stared at the prototype still in Nathan's hands. What is that? That's a patent-pending aircraft safety system, Janelle said. It's scheduled for demonstration at a national aerospace summit. Colleen scoffed. Sure it is. And I'm the Queen of England. She snatched one of Janelle's drawings from the floor, examining it with clear disdain. "Cute doodles? Be careful with those," Janelle warned. "Those aren't doodles. They're engineering calculations." Colleen shoved the page back into her lap. The edge was now torn. Janelle's breath trembled. That page had taken her 6 weeks of trial and error to perfect. That one drawing had represented months of late nights, studying airflow behavior under sudden decompression scenarios. Colleen turned away without another word. Marisol glared after her. That woman shouldn't be working on a bus, let alone a plane. Janelle didn't speak. She just gathered the rest of her papers in silence. Brady lifted his phone and took a photo. "Smile for the yearbook," he said. Marisol's voice cut in like a blade. "Delete that now." Brady smirked but did nothing. Nathan stepped into the aisle. "You need to stop." Brady rolled his eyes and leaned back in his seat. Marisol turned to Janelle, who was now clutching her prototype tightly to her chest. "Are you okay?" Janelle gave the smallest nod, but she wasn't. And somewhere in the front of the plane, Raya Cole had just stood up, phone in hand, eyes scanning the cabin. She had received the text, and she was coming. The aisle was quiet again, but the air felt different, tighter, charged. Janelle Carter sat upright in her seat, her belongings finally gathered, her prototype secured once more in its case. But something inside her felt cracked. Not broken, not yet, but something had shifted. She glanced at the torn drawing that now had a jagged scar through its margin. That page had been her proof, her pride, months of precision reduced to crumpled paper and a careless swipe. Marisol Vega leaned closer. "You need to report her. The second we land." Janelle nodded. "Barely." "I will." But her voice felt smaller than usual, like it had lost some of its resonance somewhere between Denver and despair. Across the aisle, Nathan Bell was watching her again. His jaw was still tight. He hadn't said much since handing her the prototype, but the way his eyes scanned the cabin told Janelle he was paying close attention to everything now. Brady Miles, for once, was quiet. Maybe he was bored. Maybe he was waiting. Or maybe, just maybe, even he realized they'd crossed a line that couldn't be undone. And then Janelle saw her. Raya Cole. She was walking down the aisle from first class, her heels soft against the carpet, her tablet clutched against her side. Her face was calm but focused. She had the look of someone who had trained for crisis without ever needing to raise her voice. When she reached their row, her eyes met Janelle's. "Janelle, are you okay?" Janelle nodded, but something in her face must have cracked, because Raya's expression changed. Slightly, almost imperceptibly. But Janelle saw it. She was scanning, assessing, taking in Marisol's glare, Brady's smug posture, Nathan's tense silence, and the now crumpled papers in Janelle's lap. Raya crouched beside her. What happened before Janelle could speak? Colleen Baxter reappeared from the galley. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your assigned cabin. This is a security violation." Raya stood slowly. "I'm not interfering. I'm checking on a minor passenger in my care." "You're not listed as her guardian," Colleen replied quickly. Raya tapped her badge, tucked just inside her lapel. "Senior Security Advisor, Carter Aero Systems. She's an employee's daughter, and I'm designated to accompany her." Colleen's eyes narrowed. Raya didn't wait for permission. "This passenger has filed a complaint with me via encrypted text regarding harassment, verbal escalation, and improper handling of personal property. I've seen enough from a distance to believe that complaint is valid." Colleen laughed once, short and sharp. "You're pulling out corporate titles now. She's just a kid, She's a student engineer carrying a registered prototype for national review, and you just tried to confiscate it without authority. Several passengers were now turning to look, heads peeked over seats. Whispers started. Raya lowered her voice again. I suggest you stop speaking before you say something you can't take back. Colleen stiffened. If you're threatening me, I'm protecting a minor from escalation and documenting everything. Raya pulled out her tablet and opened a video recorder. Say again why you demanded to see her boarding pass mid-flight. I was following protocol. Which one? Colleen's mouth opened, then closed. Raya tilted her head. I'll wait. Colleen turned sharply and walked away, without another word. Janelle exhaled, for the first time in what felt like hours. Raya looked at her gently. Do you want to stay here or move to first class? I don't want to leave Marisol. Raya nodded. Then we'll stay right here. She turned to Marisol. Is it all right if I sit beside you? Of course, Marisol said, already moving her bag. Raya took the aisle seat, not towering, not aggressive, but the atmosphere around them had shifted. It was like installing a firewall. Brady shifted in his seat. Is she, like, your bodyguard or something? Raya didn't even turn. No, I'm her witness. Janelle stared at the back of the seat in front of her. Her heart was still racing, but she felt something returning. Her center, her breath, her voice. Raya leaned in closer. I already messaged your father. Janelle's eyes widened. You didn't have to. I didn't tell him anything specific. Just that I'm with you, that you're safe, and that something's happening. He'll want to know more soon. Janelle looked down at her prototype. I didn't expect this. You shouldn't have to. There was a beat of silence. Then Raya continued, I've flown hundreds of times with your father. Do you want to know the pattern I've seen? Janelle looked up. People are brave until they find out who's watching, who you are, what you represent. Then they change, or they get quiet. But the thing is, you were enough to deserve respect before anyone knew your name. Janelle blinked. Her throat tightened again. But this time, it wasn't from fear. She thought of her mother, her father. The nights she stayed up soldering circuit boards with trembling fingers, the rejections, the recalculations, the tears that no one had seen, this moment, right here. It wasn't about the blanket, or the drink, or the torn page. It was about voice, and she had hers back. The intercom crackled once more. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our initial descent into Phoenix shortly. Please return your seats to the upright position and stow all personal items. Raya looked over at her. You ready? Janelle nodded. Yes, I think I am. As passengers around them began to organize their belongings, whispers continued to ripple. People were clearly discussing the confrontation. Several eyes were now following Colleen's every move. The mood had shifted. Janelle felt the prototype in her lap, solid and unbroken. She turned to Marisol. Thank you for staying with me through all of this. Marisol smiled. It's easy to be brave when someone else already is. Janelle's eyes turned to Nathan, who gave her a subtle nod across the aisle. Raya handed Janelle a fresh sheet of paper. You ready to write your report? Janelle took the paper slowly, her fingers curling around it. No, I'm ready to finish what I started. As the plane began its descent and the earth grew closer through the windows, Janelle felt it. Not fear, purpose, and whatever happened next, she wasn't going to shrink beneath it. She was going to rise. The wheels touched down on the tarmac with a hard, sudden jolt. Janelle Carter's body rocked forward against her seatbelt, then settled. The tension she carried didn't release with the landing. If anything, it deepened. She wasn't afraid, but she was alert now in a way she hadn't been before this flight. Every muscle in her body felt coiled, not from fear, but from quiet readiness. Marisol exhaled slowly beside her, as if she had been holding her breath for half the flight. Raya Cole sat motionless in the aisle seat, eyes fixed straight ahead, her tablet still resting in her lap. She had sent 2 messages during descent, one to Dominic Carter, one to an internal contact at Skynova Airlines headquarters. She hadn't needed to say much, just enough to trigger attention. Over the intercom, the captain spoke. "Welcome to Phoenix. The local time is 6:24 p.m. Please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign is turned off." The seatbelt light blinked off with a soft chime. Passengers rustled with movement. Luggage compartments popped open. Voices rose, friendly and oblivious, unaware that something on this flight had shifted permanently. But Colleen Baxter knew. She had felt the shift in the cabin, too. People were watching her now, not with admiration or respect, but suspicion. Some looked at her like they were trying to figure out what they had missed. Others wore quiet disgust. She had spent years perfecting her tone, her posture, her invisible boundary lines. Now they were unraveling under scrutiny she hadn't expected. She made her way toward the front of the plane, bypassing Raya's row without a glance. Janelle stood slowly, securing her backpack carefully. The prototype was still inside, locked in its case, undamaged. She didn't speak as she stepped into the aisle. She didn't need to. Brady didn't make a sound either. For the first time since takeoff, he didn't meet her eyes. Marisol followed Janelle, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder as they moved forward together. Raya stayed close behind. As they reached the front cabin, Colleen was already facing forward, her lips pressed into a tight line, greeting passengers with practiced formality. Her voice was neutral again. "Thank you for flying with us." But when Janelle stepped past her, Colleen faltered for just a second. Her eyes moved to the name stitched into the leather case Janelle carried. Carter. She blinked once, then twice, and the pieces began to shift behind her eyes. Janelle didn't stop. She walked through the jet bridge with quiet grace, Marisol and Raya beside her, and stepped into the terminal. Phoenix's evening light streamed in through tall windows. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Conversations echoed off high ceilings. Waiting just past security was a man in a charcoal suit, tall, calm, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that scanned every corner of the room with quiet calculation. Dominic Carter, CEO of Carter Aerosystems, and Janelle's father. When he saw her, something softened in his face. She didn't run to him. She didn't cry. She just walked toward him and stopped when they stood face to face. "Hey," he said gently. She nodded. He glanced past her at Raya, then at Marisol, then back to his daughter. "Are you all right?" "I am now." He looked at the case in her hand. Prototype, intact. Barely. She held it out for him to see. He accepted it like a priceless artifact. Opened it, inspected the housing, the coils, the circuit paths. He nodded. Still beautiful. Janelle smiled faintly. Marisol stepped forward. "Sir, I just want you to know, your daughter handled herself with more grace than any adult I've seen on a plane. You should be proud." "I am. Always," he replied without hesitation. Raya gave him a quiet nod. "It's been documented. Everything. Everything." Dominic looked down the corridor, and the attendant, still on board, should be disembarking shortly. Dominic pulled out his phone, typed a short message. No flourish, no emotion, just clarity. He looked back at Janelle. Do you want to file a formal complaint? I want more than that. He smiled slightly. Good, because that's exactly what we're going to do. At that moment, Colleen Baxter stepped off the jet bridge. She paused when she saw them. The tall man standing beside the girl she had dismissed, the tablet in Raya's hand, the woman from 27A standing close like a witness, and Janelle, standing perfectly still, calm, focused. Colleen's face drained of color. She took one step forward. Mr. Carter. Dominic turned to her slowly. I know exactly who you are. Colleen's voice cracked. This is all a misunderstanding. She was being disruptive, and Dominic raised a hand. No, you were being observed and recorded. Colleen's jaw clenched. I didn't know she was your daughter. That's the problem, he replied evenly. You shouldn't have had to. She took a shaky breath. I've worked for Sky Nova for 11 years. I've never had a complaint. Then today is a first. Raya stepped forward, holding the tablet. A video played silently for just a few seconds. It showed Colleen grabbing Janelle's bag without consent. The sound came on for one phrase. This isn't a charity flight. Colleen flinched. Dominic's eyes remained steady. You're being relieved of duty. Effective immediately. You'll be escorted to a debriefing with the Ethics Division. A full internal investigation is underway. This is unfair. What's unfair is how you treated a child carrying federal-level innovation. I didn't know who she was, and that's why you no longer work here. A silence fell. Passengers from the flight were slowing their steps now, watching from a distance. Some began recording. Colleen stood frozen, then slowly turned, walking toward the back entrance without another word. Marisol exhaled. Janelle's voice came, quiet but firm. She wasn't the only one watching me. Dominic looked at her. You want to go further? Yes. He nodded. Then you'll lead the next step. She tilted her head. What does that mean? It means Sky Nova will issue a public statement, and the review board will hear from you directly. I'm just a student. You're not just anything, he said. You're Janelle Carter. You built something that could change safety systems in commercial aircraft. And now, you're going to change how the industry treats its passengers, too. Janelle held his gaze. The moment felt bigger than the airport, bigger than Colleen, bigger than the pain, and she wasn't shrinking from it. She looked over at Raya. We'll need the logs, flight footage, passenger testimonies. Raya smiled, already collecting. Dominic touched her shoulder gently. Come on, let's go write your statement. They began walking. And for the first time that day, Janelle felt light. Not because the story was over, but because the silence had ended. The town car was quiet as it pulled away from the Phoenix terminal. Janelle Carter sat in the back seat with her hands folded in her lap, the familiar hum of the road doing little to still the hum in her chest. She should have felt victorious. Colleen Baxter had been removed. The truth had been acknowledged. Her father had stood beside her, and yet something still gnawed at the edge of her thoughts. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. Across from her, Dominic Carter was reading a document on his phone, but every few seconds. He looked up and studied his daughter's face like he could read more from it than any screen. You've been quiet. I'm thinking. About she turned her gaze out the window. How fast something small can become something public. Dominic nodded. That's the world now. Silence used to protect power, But now exposure travels faster than truth. They stopped at a private terminal where Carter Aerosystems had a reserved suite. Inside, a communications team was already at work. Laptops open, phones ringing, screens projecting flight maps and media feeds. A tall woman in a navy pantsuit walked up immediately. "Ms. Carter, I'm Ava Wallace. I run public relations for the West Division. I'd like to brief you quickly before we begin the statement process." Janelle blinked. Statement Dominic stepped in. "She hasn't decided if she wants to do one yet." Ava's tone softened. "Of course. We only proceed with your full consent, but I should let you know your name's already circulating. How someone on the flight posted a video of the interaction with Colleen. It's been viewed over 2 million times in the past 3 hours." Janelle felt the room shift. The floor didn't move, but her breath did. Ava continued. "It's been picked up by several outlets. A tech blog identified your prototype based on a blurred image from the video. They traced it back to the Northbridge Innovation Summit site, where your name was listed as a finalist." Janelle sat down. "They know who I am. They know what you're building. They're starting to guess the rest." Marisol's voice echoed in her mind. "You need to report this." But she hadn't thought that meant the world would report on her. Dominic placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to say a word until you're ready. You're not responsible for anyone else's timeline." But Janelle knew this wasn't about timelines anymore. It was about impact. "What happens if I do speak?" Ava answered gently. "You'll be heard, but you'll also be challenged. There will be supporters and detractors. Some people will say this is about race. Others will say it's about class. Some will try to dismiss it as dramatics. And if I don't speak, then they'll write the story for you." Janelle leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. Her heart thudded in her ears. "All I wanted was to study aircraft safety. I didn't come here to start a movement. Movements don't ask for permission. They start when someone refuses to stay silent." She looked up. Ava's eyes were steady but kind. Raya entered the room then, holding a small device. "We have the full footage from the flight security feed, and we've received 8 written statements from fellow passengers confirming what happened. 3 have volunteered to go on record publicly." Dominic looked at Janelle again. "This is yours to lead. You don't owe anyone a performance, but you do have something powerful to share." Janelle stood slowly and walked to the tall windows. Outside, a small jet taxied across the tarmac. The setting sun cast long shadows across the pavement. She remembered her notebook, the diagrams, the dreams. She remembered her mother's voice telling her that strength wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. She turned back. "What do I need to do?" Ava handed her a sheet of questions. "We drafted these in case you're comfortable recording a short message. Something from you. Not corporate, not scripted, just honest." Janelle scanned the questions. "What happened on the flight? Why do you think you were targeted? What do you want to see change? What would you say to young girls watching this?" She looked up again. "Give me 15 minutes. Take 20, Ava replied. Janelle stepped into a private meeting room, closed the door, and sat down with the sheet in front of her. Her fingers tapped lightly against the arm of the chair. The questions stared back like open doors. She tried to picture the moment again. Colleen's face, the crackle of the seatbelt sign, the weight of judgment that came not from what she said or did, but simply from who she was. Her voice trembled on the first try. Then she stopped, closed her eyes, took a breath, and began again. "My name is Janelle Carter. I'm 17 years old. I'm an engineering student. I build systems to keep people safe when they fly. Today, I boarded a plane hoping to learn more about aviation firsthand. What I didn't expect was to become a case study in how people can be treated unfairly for reasons that have nothing to do with their conduct. I wasn't loud. I wasn't disruptive. I wasn't asking for special treatment. I was just existing. She paused. I want people to know that dignity isn't a luxury. It's not something you have to earn. It should be the starting point. And when someone tries to take that from you, you don't have to match their anger. You can stand in truth. She finished the message quietly, then walked back into the main suite. I'm ready. They recorded it in one take. When she finished, the room was silent. Dominic looked at her, not just with pride, but something else. Respect. You're not just ready for the summit, he said softly. You're ready for what comes after. Within an hour, the video was live. Within 2, it had over 3 million views. Hashtags began trending. Raw Carter flight, voice or altitude, or respect in the skies. But Janelle didn't watch the numbers. She returned to her room, opened her notebook, and redrew the diagram that had been torn, line by line. This time, she added a new section, a sensor system that triggered alerts when internal service protocols deviated from equity standards, a kind of accountability feedback loop, her kind of justice. And when she finished, she smiled. Because now, it wasn't just a prototype. It was a purpose. By morning, Janelle Carter's name was on every news feed. Cable networks debated her video and panel segments. Tech blogs praised her prototype as revolutionary. Education podcasts called her a symbol of grace under fire. Her phone buzzed nonstop with alerts, emails, and interview requests. She ignored them all, not out of fear, but out of focus. She had stayed up past midnight reworking her diagrams, sharpening her case study notes, and preparing for the Northbridge Institute Summit as if the flight incident had never happened. Because that was the balance she had to keep now. Not letting one moment define her. Not letting one headline distract from the work that still needed doing. Still, she could feel the shift in the world around her. Her classmates from the NIT program had seen the video. Most of them sent texts, some supportive, others silent, unsure how to respond. One girl wrote, "You handled that like a queen." Another added, "Can't believe people still treat black girls like that in first class." Disgusting. Janelle didn't reply to either. She didn't want applause. She wanted results. That afternoon, she sat with her father and Raya in a high-level conference at Carter Aerosystems headquarters in Austin, Texas. Their agenda was urgent. The company had begun an emergency audit of SkyNova Airlines personnel conduct policies, starting with in-flight protocols and diversity training records. Dominic Carter paced near the head of the table. "We can't treat this like a PR patch. It has to be foundational." Across from him, Ava Wallace nodded. "We've already suspended Colleen Baxter's credentials across all affiliates, but she's only a symptom. There are deeper issues in their hiring and training models. They've quietly settled 5 bias complaints in the last 2 years." Janelle spoke for the first time. "Were any of them public?" Ava shook her head. "No. NDA clauses, but that won't stop them from surfacing now." Dominic leaned forward. "Then we're going to surface them ourselves." The room went quiet. Raya raised an eyebrow. "You want to release internal settlements. We're no longer protecting old silence. We're setting a precedent. Carter Aerosystems will not do business with any partner that doesn't hold transparency as a core value." Janelle's chest tightened slightly. This was bigger than she imagined, and it was moving fast. Too fast, maybe, But part of her had always known that justice, like science, required momentum. You couldn't just analyze. You had to act. After the meeting, Dominic pulled her aside. "Are you all right?" She nodded. "I'm just thinking about what happens after the noise dies down." He studied her. "That's when the real work begins." As if on cue. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't an alert. It was a call. Unknown number. Washington, D.C. area code. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello, Ms. Carter. This is Elise Monroe from the National Aviation Equity Council. We've been following your story. We'd like to invite you to speak at our upcoming forum." Janelle blinked. Forum. It's a congressional hearing on transportation fairness. Your experience and your vision could shape real policy change. Janelle stepped away from her father and Raya, her voice dropping. "I'm just a student. You're also a catalyst. And we think the industry needs to hear from someone who didn't just suffer injustice, but turned it into innovation." The invitation didn't come with a time to think. It came like gravity, sudden and absolute. "I'll do it," she said quietly. She hung up and turned back toward the conference room. Dominic was already watching her. Who was that Congress? He raised his eyebrows. "Already. They want me to testify." He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He stepped toward her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then I'll make sure every camera in that room is working." Later that night, Janelle sat in her hotel room with her prototype on the desk in front of her. She stared at it not with pride, but with a question. Was this enough one invention? One testimony? Would that undo the years of invisible dismissal she'd watched her parents endure? Would that change the silent calculus that judged every black girl's voice as too loud, too bold, too much? She opened her laptop and began typing. Not a statement, a proposal. She drafted an initiative, a full-scale reform recommendation titled Clear Cabin Level Equity and Accountability Reform. It included bias de-escalation training for all flight crews, real-time incident reporting apps for passengers, internal review panels with third-party oversight, protection protocols for minors in first or business class, a database tracking repeated bias complaints across carriers. It was bold, and it was raw. She didn't ask for approval. She emailed it directly to the council's address Elise Monroe had given her. Then she turned off her screen and sat in the dark for a long time. The next morning, Dominic handed her a manila folder. Inside were 2 glossy press releases, one from SkyNova Airlines, one from Carter Aerosystems. The first was a generic apology. The second was a declaration, effective immediately. Carter Aerosystems is initiating a full review of all affiliated airline conduct policies. Furthermore, we will suspend partnership with SkyNova Airlines until they demonstrate clear and accountable reform. Janelle looked up. "You're actually suspending them." Dominic nodded. "We're losing contracts, but keeping integrity." She felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Hope. Not blind, not naive, but earned. Across the city, news stations were now comparing the SkyNova response to Carter's. Industry experts began weighing in. One headline read, "Billionaire's daughter turns one flight into a nationwide reckoning." Janelle hated that framing, not because it named her, but because it missed the point. This wasn't about who her father was. This was about who she was before anyone knew her last name. The polished mahogany table stretched out before her like a runway. Bright overhead lights reflected off the microphones and the glossy surface, creating a harsh glare that cut through the room. Janelle Carter sat straight back, hands folded gently in her lap. Behind her, the wall bore the emblem of the United States Congress. The atmosphere was solemn, but electric, a collision of power, history, and the weight of the moment. Her heart was pounding, but her expression was calm. Years of practice in predominantly white spaces had taught her to cloak her emotions beneath a steady exterior, to speak without wavering, even when the world seemed intent on shaking her. Beside her sat Dominic Carter and Raya Cole, both offering quiet support. The chairman of the Transportation Committee, Senator Marcus Hill, called the hearing to order. Good morning. Today, we are here to discuss the critical issues of discrimination and equity in air travel. We are honored to hear from Ms. Janelle Carter, a young innovator whose experience has sparked national conversation. Janelle rose, cleared her throat softly, and began. My name is Janelle Carter. I am 17 years old, a student of aerospace engineering, and an advocate for equity in aviation. She paused to gather herself. On a recent commercial flight, I was subjected to repeated discrimination. This included neglect of safety protocols, denial of services, and verbal hostility from a flight attendant. She did not flinch. Despite carrying a prototype designed to improve passenger safety, a project under review by leading aerospace manufacturers, I was treated as invisible, and at times, as a problem. Her voice gained strength. This treatment was not due to any failure on my part. It was due to biases deeply ingrained in systems that govern who is seen and who is ignored. Janelle laid out her clear proposal. She described bias recognition training, real-time reporting tools for passengers, and independent review panels. She emphasized the need for accountability mechanisms that protect vulnerable passengers, especially minors traveling without guardians. She spoke not just of policy, but of dignity. When she finished, the room was silent. Then questions came, some respectful, others probing, and a few dismissive. A congressman from a Midwestern state challenged her. How can we be sure that what happened to you was not an isolated incident? Is this not simply a case of one flight attendant's poor judgment? Janelle looked directly at him. With all due respect, sir, it is not an isolated incident. Research shows that people of color experience disproportionate mistreatment in travel settings nationwide. This is a systemic problem, not a personal one. Another representative asked about the potential costs of implementing clear standards. Janelle replied thoughtfully, investing in equity is an investment in safety. When passengers are treated with respect, compliance with safety protocols improves. This benefits airlines through reduced incidents, better customer retention, and improved public trust. Her answers were precise, honest, and clear. Yet beneath the surface, Janelle wrestled with self-doubt. Was she ready for this scrutiny? For the inevitable backlash? She thought of her mother's word strength as choosing to act, despite fear, and so she chose to stand tall. Outside the hearing room, media cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Social media buzzed with praise and criticism. Some hailed her as a hero. Others accused her of leveraging privilege. A few called her story exaggerated or opportunistic. But Janelle focused on the young girl watching from her home, the one who needed to know that being seen was a right, not a favor. When the hearing adjourned, Dominic approached her. You were incredible. She smiled, exhausted but proud. It's only the beginning. Raya linked arms with her, and we're right here with you. That night, Janelle returned to her hotel room and opened her notebook. She reviewed the flight diagrams, the safety innovations, the new section she had added accountability sensors and passenger feedback loops. Her phone buzzed. A message from Elise Monroe. They want to move quickly. Are you ready to lead a working group with stakeholders from airlines, regulators, and civil rights organizations. Janelle stared at the screen. The work was far from over, but she was no longer alone. She typed her response. "Let's do this." She closed the notebook gently and looked out over the city lights. The horizon was vast, and so was the future she was determined to shape. The conference room at Carter Aerosystems was filled with tension. Executives, legal advisors, and outside consultants gathered around the long table, faces taut with concern. The glow of the city beyond the glass windows seemed distant, as if the walls enclosed a world apart, one of strategy, stakes, and silent battles. Janelle Carter sat near the center, her notebook open but untouched. The weight of the day's events settled heavily on her shoulders. Dominic Carter addressed the group, voice calm but commanding. The initial public response to Janelle's testimony has been overwhelmingly supportive, but we're also facing resistance from within the airline industry, from shareholder groups, and even some government officials. A senior executive nodded. Implementing clear standards means restructuring hiring, retraining staff, and extensive audits. It's costly and disruptive. A legal counsel added, Skynova and other partners have already hired lobbyists to push back against regulatory pressure. Janelle's eyes flicked to the window, watching the last streaks of twilight fade. The fight she'd begun was evolving faster than she expected. Marisol Vega's face appeared in her thoughts, the steadfast ally who had stood with her in that cabin. Janelle wondered how many others like Marisol had stories left unheard. She reached for her pen, but in that moment, a new message popped onto her tablet. From Tyler Brooks. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how I acted. I'm sorry. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to learn and do better." Janelle blinked. Tyler, the boy from the flight, the one whose smugness had burned through so many moments. She stared at the message, a swirl of emotions rising. Anger, disbelief, a strange glimmer of hope. Ryle leaned over. "You should reply." "Why?" "Because growth begins with accountability, even from unexpected places." Janelle tapped out a short reply. "Thank you for your honesty. I believe in learning, too." She set the tablet down. Dominic broke the silence. "We'll arrange a meeting. If he's serious, it's a step forward, but it's on him to prove it." The group moved on to the next topic: external partnerships, media strategy, legislative allies. Hours later, Janelle found herself alone in the company's innovation lab, surrounded by the hum of servers and blinking LEDs. Her prototype sat on the bench. The small case was scuffed, but intact, a physical reminder of the journey so far. She sighed deeply. What comes next? Her phone buzzed again. It was a news alert. Skynova Airlines just announced a comprehensive overhaul of its training programs and promised to implement many clear standards voluntarily. The headline blared, "Skynova responds, industry shakeup begins." Janelle scrolled through comments, some supportive, others skeptical. One tweet stood out. "Wait, why now?" After being caught, how many more stories like Janelle's are there? The question gnawed at her. How many voices remained silenced? How many changes would this truly bring? Her gaze drifted to a photo on the wall, a picture of her mother, Yvonne Carter, smiling softly from a civil rights rally decades ago. "You're not alone, Mom," Janelle whispered. The next morning brought a new kind of pressure. Invitations to speak at corporate events, requests from civil rights groups to collaborate, emails from students who said her story inspired them. But there were darker messages too. Emails from anonymous accounts, comments accusing her of using her father's influence, threats masked as warnings. Janelle clenched her jaw. She knew the weight of visibility came with costs. She turned to Raya. How do I keep going when the noise gets so loud? Raya's voice was steady. By remembering why you started. Not for applause, but for change. For every person who can't speak for themselves. Later that week, Janelle met Tyler Brooks face-to-face at a youth aviation program in Los Angeles. The encounter was awkward but honest. Tyler spoke quietly about the privilege he hadn't recognized, the lessons he was beginning to understand. Janelle listened. She didn't forgive instantly, but she saw a willingness, a rare and necessary beginning. Back at headquarters, Carter Aerosystems convened a coalition of airlines and advocacy groups to discuss industry-wide adoption of CLEAR. Dominic Carter addressed the room. This is more than policy. It's a promise that equity and safety go hand in hand. Janelle stood beside him, quiet but resolute. Together, they represented a new vision, one born from pain but driven by hope. The path ahead was uncertain, littered with political crosswinds and cultural turbulence. But for the first time, Janelle believed real change was possible. She looked out at the skyline and whispered, "Let's fly higher." 1 year later, the lobby of the Washington Aviation Academy was alive with energy. Bright banners fluttered in the soft breeze, celebrating the inaugural graduating class. A diverse group of young faces, scholars, innovators, dreamers gathered with their families, their excitement palpable. Janelle Carter stood at the podium, a beacon of calm confidence. The faded scar on her cheek was a subtle reminder of the journey that had brought her here, a journey marked by pain, resilience, and transformation. She smiled gently as she surveyed the crowd. "Thank you for joining us on this momentous day," she began. 1 year ago, I boarded a plane as a student, hoping to understand aviation. Instead, I experienced firsthand the harsh realities of discrimination, but I also witnessed the power of courage and change. Her voice carried with warmth and clarity. This academy is more than a school. It is a promise, a commitment to nurturing the next generation of engineers, leaders, and advocates who will make our skies safer, fairer, and more inclusive. Janelle spoke about the Washington Aviation Equity Initiative, the program born from the CLEAR reforms she had championed. She described the partnerships with airlines, civil rights organizations, and educational institutions dedicated to embedding equity into every aspect of air travel. As she spoke, families nodded, students listened intently, and reporters captured every word. After the ceremony, Janelle mingled with graduates, answering questions and sharing encouragement. She saw hope reflected in their eyes, the hope that change was not only possible, but inevitable. Later, she visited the prototype lab where oxygen mask innovation had been integrated into Washington Airways' new fleet. Engineers demonstrated the enhanced safety features, and pilots praised the improved emergency response capabilities. Janelle's heart swelled. Her work had transcended the pages of her notebooks. It was saving lives. Back in the corporate offices, Dominic Carter reviewed quarterly reports with satisfaction. Washington Airways' customer satisfaction ratings had soared. Employee diversity had increased dramatically, and the airline industry was adopting CLEAR as a standard. He turned to Janelle with a smile. "You've changed the world, kid." Janelle laughed softly. "We've only just begun." In a quiet meeting room, Janelle met with Marisol Vega, and now the community liaison for the Equity Initiative. Together, they planned outreach programs to bring aviation education to underserved communities. Marisol squeezed Janelle's hand. "You've given so many a seat at the table." Janelle looked out the window, her gaze steady. "And there's room for everyone now." Meanwhile, across the country. Tyler Brooks continued his transformation. His community service with youth aviation programs helped him understand privilege and responsibility. His letter to Janelle remained a symbol of accountability and growth. In the Washington Aviation Academy's newest classroom, Raya Cole led a training session for flight attendants on bias recognition and intervention, embodying the change they all sought. One evening, Janelle sat in her room, reflecting on the year. Her phone buzzed with messages of gratitude and hope. She typed a reply, "Thank you for believing. Together, we soar higher." She looked at the horizon beyond her window, the city lights sparkling like stars. The transformation she had sparked was more than policy or innovation. It was a movement, a flight toward dignity, respect, and equity for all who dared to take to the skies. As she prepared for her next challenge, Janelle whispered a quiet vow. This is just the beginning. Janelle Carter's story leaves us with more than just the memory of a painful moment. It reminds us of the strength it takes to stand tall in the face of discrimination, and the power of transforming injustice into meaningful change. Her courage challenges us all to recognize the silent battles many endure, and to demand dignity for every person, not just on planes, but in every space we share. While the actions of one flight attendant revealed deep flaws in an industry, the response sparked a revolution of equity, accountability, and hope. This story is a call to reject prejudice, to educate ourselves, and to uplift those who dare to rise despite it all. If this story moved you, show your support by liking the video, sharing it with friends who need to hear this message, and subscribing to our channel for more powerful stories of justice and resilience. Together, we can keep the conversation alive and inspire the change our world urgently needs. Thank you for watching. Remember, true courage isn't just about fighting back. It's about lifting others as you rise.